Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2022. That brings us to that title, which has been designated by Criterion at spine number 1139. This is the work from the year 1938, and the filmmaker is Marcel Carné. And the name of the work is HôTEL du NORD. This is the lovely, delicate, and wonderful work from the year 1938, and it is written for the screen by Henri Janson and Jean Orange, and based upon the novel Eugène David novel, and of course from the director Marcel Carné, with a sublime cast. For example, Annabella and Jean-Pierre Aumont and Louis Jouvet and Arletty and others. And this is the work, again, from 1938. Marcel Carné's lovely work, HôTEL du NORD. And please, once again, pardon me for my very poor pronunciation of the French language, but I am trying my best. Now, this is a work that I think if we were to try to describe the plot or story structure, I think we could focus in on this particular geographical location. We are in Paris. We're in a primarily in this area of Paris, or Paris, that can be said to be more or less working class, Canal Saint-Martin area, and focusing in on the HôTEL du NORD in question, this hotel area, this boarding house, this place of many people that are coming together in this enclosed space where many stories are being told, many different lives are being entwined and entangled and cross-cut and connected and clashing, and among those lives that are being a part of the tapestry, part of the network, part of the dynamic of this place, HôTEL du NORD, we have, say, two couples, four characters, two couples that I think come to the fore in a very kind of sublime and very almost a poetic way. And so those two couples are, so the first couple is the couple portrayed by Jean-Pierre Aumont and Annabella, and this is Pierre and René, and this is the young couple that seem to be in love, or they are in a relationship, but it seems to be in a very precarious and perhaps quite sad or tragic or hopeless situation, because we understand from very early on in the film that this young couple who come to this hotel in this part of the city, they are in love, but they have somehow or another agreed to a kind of suicide pact. In other words, they will agree to die and commit suicide as a means of expressing their love and devotion towards each other, while also somehow or another, through some kind of reasoning that perhaps is understood only to them, escaping what they perceive to be some kind of inescapable or insurmountable kind of odds or obstacle that seems to be confronting their relationship for one reason or another. So this is one aspect of the storyline. Again, it's introduced very early, and it adds a sense of, say, youth and love and romance, but also the sense of tragedy, and also a sense of the hopelessness, but also the sense of the quirks of human nature and choice, and how the elements of choice and luck or lack of luck might lead to say, surprises and twists and turns that will then not only reveal themselves in the form of, say, plot, the rhythms of plot, and the say the plot turns that confront our characters in the direct sense of the storyline, but also the way in which we see human beings react to changing circumstances in a way that will also reveal something about themselves, and that revelation about themselves will also affect how they in turn relate to other characters as they meet. Again, this is a story that is dealing with a collection of characters, a gathering of characters under the same roof, in a manner of speaking, this boarding house setting. And we see again the development of plot turning into or transforming or otherwise providing the basis for the way in which character arcs or changes or transformations then in turn lead to other connections with other characters. Now that brings us to, I mentioned another a couple, because there seem to be, at least in the four, two main or primary couples that form the anchor of the story, the anchors of the story. The second couple is that of Edmond and Raymond, and this is the Louis Jouvet and the Arletty characters, respectively. And now they seem to be maybe slightly older in terms of years than the younger couple that we saw somewhat early. They are also living, or they are maybe staying in one of the rooms here, and we seem to understand that there is a type of dynamic that seems to maybe have to do with Arletty's character entertaining certain, say, clients or clientele, and the Louis Jouvet character also having to do with that. But also there is this dynamic, there's this joie de vivre, there is a sense of the sparkling, and also the sense of the almost the bickering, and a real lived-in quality that these actors are inhabiting these characters with. And there's a bubbly vivaciousness that is also coming through in terms of how they relate to each other, their own quirks and idiosyncratic behaviors that also translate into, say, moments of comedy, moments of levity, as well as moments of revelation of character, again, in turn, that will lead to transformations and evolutions that will then provide the basis for potentially connecting with other characters. And thus we have the potential of these two couples and how their fates in one way or another are intertwined, again, under this roof that is the place of Hôtel du Nord. Now, this is the basis for so many different, say, plots or subplots that are going on. There are other characters that are also maybe surrounding or supporting or in the periphery, but they too come to the fore, because again we see how their interactions with, say, the quote-unquote main characters then in turn inspire other, say, plot developments to occur. One thing leads to another, while on this side one thing leads to another, and it becomes this very delicate balance of a cast of characters that again seem to play off of each other, and based on that type of character turn or arc, then there are other connections made, and then maybe past connections are broken in favor of new connections being forged. But what does that say in terms of the past relationships that have been left behind and the new relationships that are being forged? And what if the vice versa is true? What if new relationships are affected by the remembrances or the sort of memories of relationships of old? And what does that do in terms of how we deal, or how the characters deal with the now, the present? Again, all centering in around this place, which is Hôtel du Nord. So there is, I think, on display a really a brilliant and very absorbing sense of the drama and the melodrama as well, because we are dealing with heightened sensibilities, and we're dealing with great heightened and fine-tuned heightened senses and expressions of human emotion that are again on display in many forms and stages in the context of these two relationships, respectively, the two main protagonist relationships. And each, of course, can be said to be from a different starting place. Maybe they're starting from different places, from different backgrounds, and indeed different circumstances that confront the relationship couples, respectively, very early on. But be that as it may, those differences notwithstanding, there are those ways in which the heightened realities of the particular situations, there are ways in which they're expressing emotions, is this is a very elevated and very thus poignant and quite direct way. We see how this then affects the world around them, and thus how it also allows for viewers like myself to become fully absorbed in their storyline. It is quite an effective way of what might be called heightened reality, or sometimes the phrase that is used is poetic realism. And I think this phrase is used in order to, my understanding is, this phrase is being used to apply to the works of Marcel Carné in particular, or for example, Hôtel Nuno, because we see the way in which, quote unquote, situations of reality are being expressed through, say, a heightened form of, say, cinematic aesthetic that can be said to be, say, heightened beyond a type of gritty realism. And so we have situations of reality, that is, the scenarios of, say, a working class life, or situations of financial straits, characters dealing with their financial situations, but dealing with them in a way, in the context of these very dramatic and melodramatic plot devices and elements that are, I think, very entertaining and very absorbing, and also they lead us to being very emotionally attached to these characters, and so therefore we become emotionally attached to the world. Again, that is ultimately a world that is trying to represent something that is a mirror of, or a kind of representation of, something that we as viewers can understand or intuit as being reflections of, quote unquote, real life. So I think that's what we're talking about when we talk about poetic realism. Again, I apologize for my very amateurish way of describing it, but in those terms, in those amateurish terms that I admit are very amateurish, still I think I can try to get a grasp of this film. In other words, we have the idea of a sparkling dialogue that seems to leap off of the page and thus leap off of the screen, and this is almost it's almost like it's beyond reality. It's almost like it's so literary and poetic and beautiful. And indeed, there is a very famous phrase or line, atmosphère. Atmosphère. This is the Arletty line, atmosphère. And I love how the Criterion subtitles represent this in terms of their spelling out the sound of the word atmosphere in order to emphasize the almost the real the pitch and the force with which Arletty pronounces the word atmosphere. And so this, I think, is an example of where we have words and dialogue that seem to be so poetic and so much part of a type of literary tradition that seems to be beyond a sense of how quote unquote ordinary people might speak in realistic terms. So this is, I think, an example of where we have a quote unquote realistic situation of, say, this couple and their, say, financial situation and the things that they need to do in order to make ends meet, as it were. But aspects of that relationship, or one aspect of that relationship, is expressed in this very heightened way, this way that is heightened beyond a sense of reality. That is through the liveliness of the dialogue that feels very much part of a scripted page that was crafted by skilled writers that have a real genius and grasp of the sense of the French language. So that is, I think, one example. And I think the other example is how there is a sense of coincidence. There's a sense of the type of external forces at work that seem almost too maybe coincidental to be true. And this is where I think the element of drama or melodrama comes in. But I don't use those words in any negative light, but on the contrary, we see the ways in which the twists and turns really serve a sense of the drama or melodrama. We have characters that meet and fall in love, or resist the temptation to fall in love, that because maybe of past relationships. So we have love triangles that emerge, various love triangles that emerge, and also are, again, against the backdrop of these various plots or subplots that also reveal a sense of the realism or the realities of the time. Again, the late 1930s, working class atmosphere, a sense of relationships, and the sense of also the way in which certain relationships might be maybe quote-unquote acceptable in terms of the generally accepted social mores of the time, or other relationships or hints of relationships that might be deemed to be quote-unquote unacceptable for whatever one reason or another. So in this way too, we have a sense of the social dynamic realism of the time, again presented in these heightened dramatic or melodramatic forms in terms of these subplots, and indeed the various, say, main plots regarding our two main couples. So I think these are more examples of how the atmosphere is really heightened in order to then provide a way into this landscape of a type of reality of the 1930s through as expressed through these means of, say, a cinematic aesthetic and indeed purposely applied artifice. Now, this purposely applied artifice is also expressed in a very grand and a sublime way in terms of, say, for example, the way in which the sets are constructed. And this is where the work of Alexander Trauner comes into play. Trauner is mentioned with great affection, and also the genius in terms of the way in which there is a sense of the reconstruction of this place, Hôtel du Nord, and how that reconstruction is very important, because it's a reconstruction that is very much a dramatic reconstruction. It's almost a it's a theatrical based reconstruction that also in certain details calls attention to its own artifice, but at the same time it also acknowledges its inspiration from the real world, that is this area of Canal Saint-Martin and this area of Paris, that again, it's meant to suggest or evoke or represent something of the real, but doing it through means of, let's say, the artifice or the artificial or the purposefully theatrical, but also in a way that celebrates that and also calls attention to the cinematic aesthetics of, again, this phrase, poetic realism. So I think those phrases and that type of approach in terms of this aesthetic combine while providing a story that is very entertaining, very absorbing, very shocking, and there are twists and turns galore that I think leave the viewer shocked and stunned, as well as wanting more, as well as rooting for the characters, rooting for our heroes and heroines, and hoping that through whatever obstacles that might be in their way, they can still overcome whatever it is that they need to confront, whatever the case may be. Will they succeed or won't they succeed? This is, again, part of the suspense. This is part of the draw. This is part of the way in to this really great film that is entertaining through and through. This is the work, again, from 1938, Marcel Carné, and the work is Hôtel du Nord. The Criterion Collection has released this film, Hôtel du Nord, at spine number 1139, and this is the Blu-ray release, and it's purported to be based on a 2K resolution, a restoration, digital restoration. Now, I've already removed the insert, which is a fold-out type, from the inside of the case prior to the start of recording this video. And that's in order to read what it says about the restoration in the inside flap here, one of the flaps. And it says about the restoration, Hôtel du Nord is presented in its original aspect ratio of 1.37 to 1. This digital restoration was created in 2K resolution from the 35mm original camera negative. The monaural soundtrack was remastered from the 35mm original soundtrack negative, etc. And it also says here, additional restoration was performed by the Criterion Collection. So very, very impressive package in terms of the look and the sound of the film. Again, from my casual and very sort of limited expertise perspective, from my own perspective as a casual, say, viewer and also a consumer of this product, I was very impressed, and I am very impressed. There is a sharpness and also a softness that is applied, I think, purposefully, with a type of a sense of meaning when those are applied effectively, there is a sense of how that becomes a part of the ensuing drama. It really it becomes very absorbing. There's a way in which the shadows and the linear lines of the buildings also give way to the smoke and the mist, and also the nighttime, and also we have the crowd scenes and details in the back and the walls, as well as the details of the close-ups of the face and the sort of the shadows of bars and windows, as well as the sort of the landscape shots and the also intimate shots as well. There is a real sense of contrast and also a sense of the blending together. And so I found that that overall picture quality to be very absorbing and quite magnifique. Indeed, and I found the sound to be very crisp and clear. Again, to my own very sort of inexperienced eyes and ears. Despite my inexperience, I found myself to be very taken with this particular presentation and the look and sound of it. Very impressive indeed. I mean, it feels very fresh. And I think that's very important, and because there's a sense of the liveliness that is really kept and preserved when watching this presentation, I feel. So all in all, I'm very impressed with the way this looks and this sounds. So again, I think you're in for a real treat with this Criterion release, HôTEL du Nord. And then now let's continue on with the supplements that are included here. Now, I think I count, in terms of quantity, there aren't that many when compared to, say, other releases, but quality-wise, I think we're getting quite a lot, and a really great pool of resources and a great wealth of information that can also serve as a type of jumping off point for further studies in the works of Marcel Carné, and also an analysis of HôTEL du Nord and other works. So what do we have here? So first of all, the first supplement is Poetic Vision of Marcel Carné. This is from the year 2022, and approximately 18 minutes. And here we have an interview with a filmmaker, Jean-Pierre Jeunet, who's also not just a filmmaker in his own right, not just this sublime, extraordinary artist genius in his own right. He's also a self-professed fan and admirer of the works of Marcel Carné. And so we have a number of things happening at once. We have a type of almost a fan of the world of Carné, showing the many, say, collectibles and items and, say, scripts and posters and stories and anecdotes about the nature of the sort of the collectibles in the world of Carné that Jean-Pierre Jeunet has enjoyed over the years. And he shows this part, or we see little aspects of this in this office, or the location of this particular interview, which is really, really cool, very cool indeed. And then also we have a discussion of how the works of Carné, focusing on the works of Carné and what it is about the works of Carné and the themes and those treatments of the worlds and the lives, and again the phrase poetic realism, which I tried in my very limited amateurish way before to try to express my understanding of what this is, how this is identified in many of the works of Carné, such as Le Jour se lève and Port of Shadows, and also this work, HôTEL du Nord. And also, as a separate level, too, or as extended level, then Jean-Pierre Jeunet talks about how, in many ways, his own works, Jeunet's own works, can be said to have a sense of the expressions of the poetic realism aspects that share many of the visual and thematic qualities that can also be said to be existing in the world of Carné. And so works like Delicatessen come to mind, and this is also an opportunity for Jeunet to show not just the world and the aesthetic similarities with that of, say, Carné, but also plot points and also points of, say, setting and decor that have direct homage links to certain works of Carné, and these are revealed in this interview discussion. So fascinating stuff. Again, Carné, and also the influence and homage, reverence towards Carné, not just as an artist and filmmaker, but also the world, and also the collections and the collectibles. So it's a multi-leveled interview to the max, and it's brilliant for that. There are also some great discussions. Again, the world of Carné, especially this period of his cinema. There's his connection, his collaboration with Prévert, and so the words Prévertise and Carnésise are used, and so this collaboration between these two artists is very famous. Although one must say that Hôtel du Nord is a work where we don't have the Prévert-Carné collaboration, but indeed we have different writers that are employed here for purposes of the storytelling, and indeed also because of the we'll get this a little bit later, the contribution of the writers and how the novel was adapted in order to put emphasis on, say, certain characters that might not have gotten emphasis in the novel. That turned into the opportunity to create a sense of a feeling of freedom, of the creation of stories and words and dialogue of characters that got more prominence in terms of the screen adaptations. We'll get a little bit of this later, but this is to say that the writing process and the collaboration between writer and director is a key one. And here, without question, for the works of Marcel Carné, this is also very important. But also the professional relationship between Trauner and Carné is also emphasized here, in the idea of the way in which bridges and the canal are represented, and there's a sense of the realism sense of the place, but also there is also a kind of a self-acknowledged artifice that is then meant to display the grand artistry of the craft that was able to bring this brilliant set together, Saint-Martin. And also there are some moments where Genet recognizes the idea of forced perspective, and how this is also in turn a way of, again, another representation, one might say, of poetic realism, that of using cinematic aesthetic that is very self-evidently cinematic, but that is used as a prism for storytelling that has its roots in quote-unquote realism. And so the idea of forced perspective and the way that sets are treated, and foreground and background with examples being given, I think is quite extraordinary. And that's another great observation in terms of this furtherance of an understanding and appreciation of quote-unquote poetic realism, or perhaps, to be put it another way, an appreciation of the philosophical or cinematic philosophy of Marcel Carné, and how he employs various, say, cinematic stylings and visual tricks, as well as the dialogue and the sharp punch of the dialogue, in order to tell these very, what otherwise might be said to be very gritty stories, that's said in a very heightened way, as I say, a very almost operatic way. Now, then that leads to some discussion of Arletty and Jouvet, and this way in which their characters are really fleshed out in a way that makes them so iconic. Again, the way in which they have held such a sort of legendary status in the sort of the books of French cinema. I think it's something that's mentioned here, and it's mentioned everywhere. Again, in particular, Arletty's performance and the dialogue that she gives. Atmosphère is it's described as being one of the most, if not the most famous line in French cinema. So I mean, it's incredible to see that, and just to see the sort of organic nature of how this was formed, and also this idea of adaptation and the freedom that came with adapting these particular characters who might otherwise not have had the same breadth of exposure, say, in the novel. While on the contrary, the characters of René and Pierre had some prominence in the novel, I understand, and thus adapting those characters might not have led to, well, let me put it this way, there might have been different concerns and approaches in terms of trying to adapt those characters versus adapting Edmond and Raymond characters. So again, very interesting dynamic. We'll get a little bit more of this in another supplement. But the point to make here is that with the focus in on the writing, director collaboration, the set visual perspective and director collaboration, and also the actor-director collaborations. And also too, the emphasis about how Hôtel du Nord as a story is a set of stories because it's a set of characters. It's a gallery of characters, again, connected by this location. Hôtel du Nord, which itself is a type of reality and fiction intertwined all at once. And so that, I think, is also acknowledged in this really warm and affectionate way by Jean-Pierre Jeunet here in this really great interview. So please check it out. It's approximately 18 minutes, again, from 2022. But that's not all, because then we have another supplement which is called Making Hôtel du Nord, and this is from Au Cinéma Ce Soir, and let's see, this is approximately 33 minutes, and this is from April 1972. And what this is it's dividing the presentation of this into various parts, again, in 1972. So I understand that this is meant to provide context of the film as it's being shown on television. Again, for audiences in the 1970s who might not necessarily have, or might be being introduced to this film for the first time. And so we have, for that basis, a type of introduction into what the film is. And one of the ways that this Making Hôtel du Nord introduces the world is by, first of all, providing the social political context and the historical backdrop of 1938. And so this is the news portion. The events of 1948 are represented in various newsreel or newsreel type footage that is edited together to provide the backdrop, the primary focus of which being the events that that were leading up to the Second World War. And so we have, in particular, focusing in on Adolf Hitler and also Neville Chamberlain and the attempt by certain forces in Europe to try to prevent the outbreak of war. We now, of course, know that this attempt, peace for our time, this phrase, it's alluded to, although it's not, I understand, directly shown in this particular footage. That notwithstanding, we understand that this notion, in order to prevent a type of outbreak of war, did not succeed in the way that the certain players or certain participants had hoped and planned. But in any event, we have these events that are being set up for us. But we understand that there is a type of heightened and quite politically sensitive and potentially volatile situation that is already afoot in France and also surrounding France during this period of the late 1930s, 1938. So this is providing us with the backdrop, kind of a historical and social political context that I think is very important to then make us understand what it is, or the stakes, as it were, that are existing while this film is being made and produced and released. That's not all, because then we have an introduction into the film itself, and so we have the opportunity to hear from Marcel Carné himself, and he is being interviewed. He talks about the inspiration for the film, and also we have other people that are mentioned and also spoken about or speaking. And so we have, for example, the actors and participants being mentioned or referred to: Arletty, Annabella Aumont, and Henri Janson, the writer, or one of the writers, the credited writers, from a 1969 excerpt. It's described that way in terms of the working relationship between writer and director. Arletty, in her portion, talks about how there was relatively little shooting time. I think 6-day shooting schedule is mentioned, which is remarkable in terms of how she and Jouvet, how their presence really becomes the lifeblood of the film in many ways. And indeed, Aumont, who is the character who, who's the actor who plays Pierre, how he says that, on the one hand, the roles that he and Annabella played, they weren't necessarily written for those actors in mind, whereas the roles of Edmond and Raymond, were roles that seem to have been written for Louis Jouvet and Arletty respectively. And so that meant that maybe in the grand scheme of things, maybe Arletty got quote unquote the better lines or the better dialogue. And indeed, I think the general consensus is that that's probably true. Now, that being said, I think what's really nice about the dynamic between the two couples that I mentioned, Annabelle and Jean-Pierre Aumont couple on the one hand, and Arletty and Louis Jouvet couple on the other, is that I think there's a nice contrast between not just the age brackets of the characters, and not just the story arcs of the characters, but also the way in which there's a type of a type of almost casual vivaciousness of, on the one hand, of one of the character sets, whereas there's a sort of a stoic tragedy with the other set of characters. So I like that contrast, and that contrast really helps to have the characters build off of each other, as well as provide a sense of balance and a sense of variety to the proceedings. That's really important. So indeed, I think Aumont's comments in terms of a sense of stoic rigidity, I think really actually serve the film really well in terms of giving it a sense of balance. So in any event, these comments, I think, are very frank and very honest and very refreshing. And that's part of the proceedings that you'll have here in terms of the discussions here. Again, there's Raymond, the Arletty character, got all the best lines, and that's one of the refrains of this particular documentary making of short or supplement. And I think general consensus that's probably the case, although that's not to take anything away from the other performances of the characters. Again, this film is also about balance and network and tapestry and a gathering of characters, and so in that way too the film succeeds extraordinarily. And then other things are, again, Marcel Carné goes into sort of inspiration of the work. There's also a discussion of Armand Tirard, the director of the cinematography, etc. It's also really wonderful in terms of the some camera movement and some choice of shot perspective, etc. So all in all, a wonderful introduction into the world and the context, historical context, as well as the production context. And also we get, if anything, too, direct comments from the participants themselves, Arletty and Marcel Carné and others. So for that and many other reasons, you've got to check out this making of a piece from the year 1972. Please check it out if you can. It's really, really worth it. That's not all, because then we have a 30-minute short, another documentary, Jean-Denis Bonin. This was described as being from 1994, and it's called Carné, You Said Carné. And this is a really great primer, overview, introduction, celebration of the career and life of Marcel Carné. And it's from various voices, various critics, and various participants that are being interviewed to talk primarily or mainly about what can be said to be the early half, or the cycle of films that Carné is perhaps most known for. Tour de Dame, or Port of Shadows, Hôtel du Nord, Le Jour se lève, Les Visiteurs du Soir, and Les Enfants du Paradis, and how these are often described as being, for the most part, the sort of the Carné-Prévert collaboration, although, as we mentioned, Hôtel du Nord being an example of Prévert not being present, but the other writers, Henri Janson and Jean Orange being the writers in question. But for the most part, this cycle is being discussed in the Carné-Prévert relationship, and also taking that opportunity, talking about the dynamic between Carné and Prévert. Maybe there might have been a general perception contemporary to the times as to the influence of one artist over the other, and that particularly maybe irked Carné, or maybe it was giving Carné not enough credit. And indeed, this short is also trying to present that, I think, in a fair and reasonable way, but also in a way that is giving the spotlight, the spotlight that is due to Marcel Carné and his really wonderful career. So, in this way, we have this great introduction to this core period of Marcel Carné's work. It does go into some of the works that appear afterwards, but they are treated in a way as a type of, I wouldn't call them afterthought, but the thesis of this work, of this documentary, could be said to be the really impeccable, extraordinary, and successful artistic achievements that are this core body of work, included in which is Hôtel du Nord. So it also is an opportunity to touch upon these works somewhat, and but not in a way that is overly detailed or filled with quote unquote spoilers. So for anyone who is, say, watching the works of Carné for the first time, or maybe watch Hôtel du Nord as your first entry into the world of Carné, I think this documentary is a great primer. It's also a great way to whet one's appetite. If you enjoyed Hôtel du Nord and you want to watch another Carné work, but you're not sure where to go, I think you could watch this documentary, and it'll give you a number of great ideas that you might go, that you might turn to. Also, too, within the dynamic of this core set in the filmography, excuse me, we also have some great comparison and contrast. For example, I think a lot is said about a type of core trilogy, or some kind of a way in which the works, in particular Port of Shadows and Hôtel du Nord and Le Jour se lève, seem to operate together in tandem, and also they complement and supplement each other in a very thematically clear way, but also they have wonderful contrasts. And so I think Port of Shadows and Le Jour se lève are oftentimes, and I think very rightly so, described as being somewhat darker in tone and somewhat having a kind of a grave seriousness about them. Whereas Hôtel du Nord, I think on one level could be said to be somewhat maybe a lighter film on the one hand, but there is also the way in which a thematic connection can be established when we think about certain dark or quite grave or serious themes or plots or subplots that emerge or creep into Hôtel du Nord, thus giving a sense of a thematic continuity between and among these works, while also seeing how they set themselves apart from each other. So that kind of dynamism in terms of the operation between and among works within this core set of filmography of Carné, I think, is fascinating. One of the great observations of this documentary, which is filled with many great observations. Also, there's a sense Carné is described here as being by one of the critics being interviewed, or one of the interviewees as being a plebeian filmmaker, or a filmmaker maybe with a sense of, say, not necessarily focusing in on the bourgeois, but focusing in on the other class, or the other type of, for lack of a better phrase, working class settings and environs. And I think Hôtel du Nord is a great example of this. We might get a sense, we might not necessarily know all of the detailed backgrounds of the characters that we meet, but the geography and the setting and the various dialogues, patterns that emerge, I think can suggest this. Also, in terms of the heightened realism of the approach and style, German filmmaking, lighting is also mentioned, and also there is a reference to the relationship between director and writer, and also director and cinematographer. And sometimes that relationship might have been quite tense, because of the demands that Carné made on the artistic collaborators, respectively. But even with this tense relationship that is acknowledged, there is also this sense of Carné being right. And so I really love this observation about the exacting nature of Carné as an artist. I mean, there's an example, an anecdote given about a line, tomatoes, tomatoes, comma, very ripe. And apparently Carné took the writer to task and trying to figure out what the justification was for the placement of that particular comma, and to be able to then try to determine where the emphasis should be placed in terms of the speaking out of this line. So this becomes an example of where Carné, according to the anecdote, becomes very exacting even about a comma. And so that is meant to be, I think, an example of the exacting, demanding nature of Carné, the artist. But it was always for the purpose and for the philosophy of the film. And so I think that is, a very affectionate anecdote as well. Really well done. So this is a wonderful gathering of, say, artists and critics and admirers of the works So if you're interested, again, in getting an introduction to the world of Carnet, in particular this core set of films, including which is Hôtel du Nord, then this documentary is for you. So please check it out if you can. This is Carnet, You Said Carnet from 1994. And then, last but not least, we have the supplements rounding themselves out with the inclusion of a trailer. It's a great trailer, period piece, very fun, very exciting, and again, it's showing the, displaying all the treats and turns of this work, Hôtel du Nord, in a wonderful, enticing way. So please check that out if you can, the trailer for Hôtel du Nord. And so now let us turn to the packaging as well as the insert. So a word about the packaging. I love this cover art design. There's a sense of the black and white cinematography aesthetic that's being captured. The place and the emphasis on the couples or the couples in question, Hôtel du Nord, and the wonderful pictorial design that's emphasized here in the cover art, as well as you have the back here, and I love the font. The font is very much meant to be reminding us of the actual font, I think, of the lettering on the outside of the building itself. And you have also at one of the key scenes early on, part of the inside flap. I love it when Criterion does this. It doesn't do it with every single release, I think, but when it does, I think when you have some kind of interior, art design as part of the goodies of the package, I think that's really worth it. It's great, and it's again a detail, because one of the things that we mentioned too is it's the sets, that it's also the look and feel, the place, Trauner's design. Canal Saint-Martin, this place in Paris, this couple or these couples, it's all connected, and it's I think expressed in this packaging and the choices in this packaging very nicely. I should point out that the art is credited to art directors Sarah Habibi, Eric Skillman, illustration Karolis Stratnikas. So very, very skilled indeed. I'm very impressed. And also I should have another, let me make a comment about this insert. It's a fold-out type, so I'm not a fan of the fold-out type, as I've mentioned time and time again. But just a word about this. I love the look of the presentation of these stills or photos or pictures that are here on various pages, and I love the font use, and I love the paper. Again, lately I think the use of the paper has a kind of quality to it that I'm enjoying very much. And also there is an essay by Edward Baron Turk, excuse me, Professor Edward Baron Turk, and this is an essay called Atmosphere in Question. Wow, a great essay. Now, again, watch the film first, and then you can read the essay, because it does go into specific details about some of the plot of the film. But after you've seen the film, you can read this, and it gives you, again, another great introduction into the world of Carnet. It also gives some points, and it really complements a lot of the production detail information that we saw in some of these other supplements really nicely, as well as also showing a nice platform for more of a type of analysis of the film itself and other places, as well as the historical context of this in the context of the history of late 1930s, as well as the context of the filmography of Carnet overall. So, great stuff. Professor Edward Baron Turk's essay is well worth it. The atmosphere in question. Again, that word atmosphere comes up time and time again. It comes up in the essay here, as well as other places, as in the film itself. So, well done for this great essay. Another great one in the context of Criterion releases. So that is, in a nutshell, the Criterion release of Hôtel du Nord. This is a great one. It's a real lovely piece, a lovely work, another great celebration of Carnet, another great introduction into the world of Carnet for those who are meeting Marcel Carné's works for the first time. It's a great place to go if you're whatever position you might find yourself in. This is one heck of a film. You're going to love it. This is the work which is Hôtel du Nord. Okay, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.